Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Game, Develop, Repeat, the podcast where we talk about a game that I enjoy, what makes it special, and what we, as game developers, can learn from it. I'm your host, Chris, a music educator turned indie game developer, and today's episode is all about Dave the Diver. In this episode, we discuss commitment and variety, control schemes, mini games, charming characters, and communication. Let's get to it. If I had to describe Dave the Diver in a single word, I would describe it as charming. This game has really pulled me in with all the little touches that it has that give it all of this character and all of this charm. The favorite feature of mine, and I will describe what the game actually is in a moment here, but my favorite feature within the game is these small, almost little like music video style segments. They're like little 5 to 10 second clips of a character doing something, and they're just these fully animated like pixel art, really cool, interesting character building videos, and they bring a lot to the table in terms of like showing you what is the character's personality, showing you what is charming about that character, what is interesting about that character. And that brings so much to this game for me. So you get those for like your weapon specialist, you get them for like random customers, you get them for the sushi chef. Now let's talk about what Dave the Diver actually is. Especially since this is one of the very rare instances in which I cover a recent release. This game has like just come out. One of the reasons I'm covering it is because it is a fishing game, and I am obsessed with fishing games. I say fishing, it's kind of a spear fishing game. So you play a scuba diver named Dave who goes into this large, deep sort of trench, I'm going to call it. I think they call it like the Blue Hole. But it's this very unique diving location that has fish from all over the world. So you dive in there and basically you spear fish. And you get those fish for a sushi restaurant. And you also act as a sort of manager for the sushi restaurant. You mess with the menu, you mess with the staff, you serve customers a little bit. So there is a management aspect to this game as well. It's not super intense. For me, the favorite part of the game is definitely the diving because I have a weird and inexplicable obsession with catching fish in video games, but I'm also weirdly picky about it. There's something about like the fishing has to feel just unimportant enough for it to satisfy me. It has to feel like it's not the entire game, and it also has to have a certain aesthetic to it. I don't like realistic fishing. It kind of drives me crazy. There's enough of an adventure going on in this game where it doesn't feel like it's just a game about fishing, and simultaneously it feels like if I want to take a day to just do the fishing element, I can take a day to just do the fishing element. So I really appreciate that about it for my own personal preferences. What else is going on in this game? There's this interesting thing where it kind of keeps introducing little mini games and tiny mechanics throughout the game. I'm quite far into the game. I believe it seems like I am, and it keeps throwing little mini games at me. It just threw like a sort of like a Tamagotchi mini game at me. Like there's just all these little mechanical surprises which if you don't go deep enough into the game, you're not going to notice. I did notice like there are like some major points in the game where I got I got an achievement for getting to some point in the game, and then I looked at the achievements and it's like 20% of players have this. I'm like, they've introduced a whole bunch of weird mini games after this point in the game. Like people are just not seeing some of this content that they've created, which is fine. But they've spaced it out in a very unexpected way, which is, I'm trying to figure out if that's great or if it's like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how I feel about that. I think it's cool because I keep running into new features and stuff, and every once in a while something will surprise me and make me laugh and be really interesting. Um, but for the most part, it's like, oh, here's just another fun thing you can do, just by the way. I mentioned the character building already with those little videos, and I just gotta like dig in a little bit more on that. I'm not going to describe shot for shot any of the videos because I want you to experience them for yourself, but just to give you a little bit of the flavor, to give you an idea of what kind of over dramatic I'm talking about. It is a little bit comedic for sure. Let's give you an example of one that happens with the sushi chef, right? Without reading through it shot for shot, it would be, imagine preparing sushi, all right? But just imagine that you were doing it in the most dramatic, serious way possible. And there's like a little bit of an anime aesthetic to how over dramatized it is. And then the people around you are having reactions that are a little intense, but not like completely off the wall intense. It's that. It's like people being wowed by somebody else doing something that's kind of an everyday skill, or somebody doing something that shouldn't be that dramatic in a way that is extremely over the top. It's very anime. It's really got an anime vibe. And there is a character who is obsessed with anime, and he is a little bit of a butt of some jokes, but in like a kind of more of a playful way to me. I don't think it's too much of like a bullying vibe, but maybe that's just because I find it funny and I'm like not noticing it. But it is like a neckbeard stereotype. Like they are going in pretty hard on like the full stereotype for somebody who's a neckbeard with one of the characters. And they really make it very, like, I end up liking the character a lot just because of all the little like tiny videos they give him, and the charm behind it is kind of beautiful. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Oh, I missed one. The other little mini game thing going on is there's like a farming thing. It's not in depth at all, but there is just like a random little farming thing and like a little fish farming thing. It's kind of just a way to get ingredients. I think they put it in there to be like, hey, look, we have farming too. Or just for some fun. It's not in depth. It's kind of just a thing to check. So there you go. If you're looking into it and you're like, ooh, I really want to do some farming, it's not a farming game. They even acknowledge that within the introduction of the farming part. They're like, this is not a rice farming game. As part of kind of it's part of a joke that they have, and it works in the situation, but they're kind of explaining why the rice grows so quickly, basically. So anyway, a couple other things I wanted to talk about with this game. I kind of had this thought while I was playing it where I can't figure out if it is committing really hard to its theme or if it's not committing at all. And I think it's really interesting. I think it shows a lot of commitment to being a little bit comical, being a little bit ridiculous. There's great commitment in this game to certain things. But then it's also doing all these separate and like disparate mini games, which is absolutely fascinating to me because it's so clear to me that this team really knew what they wanted this game to be. They were like, this is the flavor of this game. This is the vibe of this game. This is how it feels. This is how it plays. This is what world we're in. It's crystal clear. They want to do references to certain things. Like, it's like, I get it, right? Very clear, very clean, obvious commitment to that side of things. But at the same time, they're exploring so many different mechanics and getting so much variety in there. And I think it's absolutely fascinating how they manage to create a game in which it feels like they have fully invested in one idea while simultaneously exploring like 20. Like, they really go all over the place with these different ideas that they explore. And I appreciate it. I think if I was super invested in any of the mechanics other than the fishing, like if any one of them was really, really exciting for me, I would be a little bit disappointed and I would probably want more of it. But luckily for my tastes, I love the fishing and I'm all about it. So that works out really well for me. And having just a little sampling of everything else works great. So this concept of committing to the bit, basically, I think what they're doing is they're just committing to the jokes really well. They're just going, okay, we're just going to fully commit to this character being like this, and this interaction being like this, and this thing being unrealistic in this specific way, which I think makes the game. I think if they did not have all of this charm, if they didn't have all of this commitment to their characters, if they didn't know exactly what the joke is at any given moment, or like how over dramatic they're being for whatever reason, I think it wouldn't go quite as well. And then the variety, I think, is actually not that important in this game. That's what's interesting to me. I get the feeling that they did all these weird mini games because they wanted to. That's my impression. But I love it. It just feels like people were having fun making the game, and I could be completely wrong. I can't see into their brains. I have no idea. You never know with a game studio, right? Like maybe you play the game, it's the most fun thing ever, and then you hear about the inside of the studio and you're like, "Oh, never mind. They were not having as much fun as I thought." But it really does look like on the surface they were having a good time and they were like, "Oh, I have this fun idea. Like it'll take me like 2 weeks to implement it. Can I add it to the game?" And then somebody else is like, "Yeah, I like that too. I'll work on it with you." That's the impression that I get from all the weird random mini games included in this game. Okay. Let's move forward a little bit more. I think, is there anything else I want to talk about the actual? Oh, you know what? Let's talk about the like equipment stuff because it's a little bit interesting. So, you have gear, you have ways to level up your gear. They've kind of committed to this unrealistic thing where you can upgrade all your gear through your phone, which is fine. They're just like, oh wow, technology has come so far. There's different depths that you can go to in the game, so you can go to a certain depth, and then if you go too far, then you lose oxygen much quicker. So you have to like upgrade your suit to go deeper. You can also upgrade your oxygen. You can upgrade your harpoon, and there's like another little mini game that happens while you're fishing, and this one has a variety to it as well. It has a few different versions. So you like harpoon a little fish, and then sometimes you have to rapidly tap. I'm playing on an Xbox gamepad, so sometimes I'll have to rapidly tap A in order to catch the fish. Sometimes I will have to like spin one of the joysticks in a certain direction in order to catch the fish. This depends on what element I have on my harpoon. Some of the harpoon tips are like poison tipped, fire tipped, shock tipped. So sometimes you have to wiggle the stick left and right, whatever. Sometimes you have to click two buttons really quickly. So it'll be like XB, and you have to just hit those really quick. That is an element of the fishing that I like because it adds a little variety. It gives me that little like skill-based, little action-y check to it. I'm a big fan of that stuff, as you may know if you've listened to. I must talk about that a lot in the very first episode of this podcast, right? Because Legend of the Dragoon is a very like action, time-based combat thing. So that's a theme for me. I love a little time-based action, almost quick time event stuff, but not really, like a little bit more skill-based. So it's got that. It's got like, there are like fish that attack you. And as your harpoon does more damage, it gets a little easier to catch fish. That's another one of the upgrades you can do. And then you can also have like underwater guns. You can pick stuff up. You can create permanent guns that you can bring in with you. And then anything that you pick up under the sea doesn't survive returning back to the surface. So you can't like find a gun and keep it forever. You find a gun, and then that's just like for that run. It's got a little bit of a roguelike element in that way. Extremely light roguelike. I personally wouldn't call this game that because I think that would be a confusing way to describe it. Let's see. So within all of that, it adds a cool element of like when you're catching the fish, you have like a sudden moment of excitement, where you go, oh, I've got to do this real quick. And for me, I usually have to shift the position of the controller in my hand because I'm not a good thumb button masher. I usually use my pointer finger. So like if I have to mash A really quickly, I will take my right hand off and go crazy on mashing A and like rest the controller against my leg. I also find that it feels like I have to mash very quickly to get that one to work for that prompt. Quality of the fish you catch depends on how much you've like injured the fish. So you can tranquilize fish and catch them that way and have higher quality. You can put them in a net and catch them that way and have higher quality. There's cool little choices you have to make about which gear you want to bring into the water with you. Your oxygen operates as your health, which is a really useful little dual mechanic thing. This is actually super important. I almost forgot to talk about this, but I thought it was one of the best things about this game, from a game design perspective. The control scheme is so well thought out. I can tell that whoever thought about how to map these controls to the gamepad has played so many games where the controls bother them a tiny bit and was like, I am not making those mistakes, and thought very carefully about every little element of it. Because this is the cleanest example of this I have. If you were talking to someone and it's a dialogue that you've already heard before, which is definitely a thing that happens, you will mash A to try to get through the dialogue. And then you'll finish the dialogue. And in a lot of games, you're still mashing A before the dialogue finishes because you weren't paying attention, and you will unintentionally restart the dialogue, right? In this game, A is the mash to get through the dialogue, X is the button to start the dialogue. And that makes a huge difference for me. There's also a lot of menus where they just have a handy shortcut. One or two of them I haven't gotten used to just because it's so unfamiliar and I'm so used to the usual tropes, but they have good menu management. When you're managing the restaurant, they've really assigned the buttons very smoothly, where like if you need to change the menu while you're managing the restaurant, you just have it pre-selected over a certain thing, and you hit A and boom, you're in there. You can change the menu, and then like serving is X, and it's really smooth. I can't express how much I appreciate a control scheme that makes sense and just does a couple tiny changes so that you don't run into a few little like infuriating things. Like it doesn't feel very stressful. It feels very solid, and it makes a ton of sense for me. Let's move forward and start talking about how we can use some of the lessons learned from this game in our own game development and in our own projects. I have a bunch of questions here to help me learn from this game, and the first question that I have is directly tied to what we were just talking about. The question is, when trying to map controls efficiently, what would be going too far? My immediate thought is binding something that would normally be on A to something like Y would be going too far. If anybody remembers playing like old RPGs in the PS2 era, there was this time where the confirmation button would be on circle, and then other games' confirmation button would be on X, and it drove me insane. So if there's a very, very strong cliche thing that everybody is doing in all games, you should probably pay attention to whether or not you want to break that cliche. I think that's very important. I have an issue right now with my game where I have attack bound to mouse click, and then I also have it bound to a couple of keyboard keys. I have it bound to Q and E. So if you're not using a gamepad, then attack is like mouse click, which is just a little odd because you don't use your pointer for anything. So that's going to change, don't worry. But it's one of those weird things where it's like, well, nobody expects this, so don't do it. At the same time, I do think it is important to let yourself do a little bit of a change for efficiency's sake. Like I do appreciate how A is not the way that you start talking to people, it's X, but X is right there and you're still using A for a whole bunch of other stuff. And yeah, I think it works. But I think they execute it in a way where it's communicated very clearly. The prompt is always on the screen. That's the other part. If you're going to do something very unconventional, you got to keep the prompt on the screen to like keep reminding people, or you got to make it very clear and make sure that they learn it early on or something like that. I'm a big fan of making sure you communicate really clearly when you're doing something that is outside of the norm, but not in like an obnoxious way. You don't want the little, hey, listen, you don't want clippy, right? You don't want that kind of like relentless nagging that sometimes people will set up. Clippy being the old Microsoft Office assistant for any of our younger listeners. I'm not going to explain any more than that. Have a little Google search and learn about Clippy. He's the most adorable frustration you will ever deal with. Next question. How could you add charm to a project without having to do fully animated videos? I do think there's a lot of charm behind those little videos. I'm taking inspiration from those videos in this answer. And I'm also answering it in a way I've just realized that makes me feel like what I've already done is good and that I don't have to change it. And I should probably openly explore other ideas rather than just trying to confirm my own stuff. But my thought process is have charming little animations. So if your character is walking or jumping or whatever, don't just make it flat. Don't just make it exactly what you would expect. Give it a little spice. Give it a little weirdness to it. Give it like a little spin in the air. Give it a little extra bounce or a weird manner of walking or whatever, right? Give it something that makes you know something about that character. Everybody has their own distinctive way of walking, talking, all of these things. They have their own little weird speech patterns. They have their own tendencies. They have their own little things that they're obsessed with. Give people quirks. And I think there are quirks that you can add that don't take a ton of effort, and then there are quirks that you can add that do take a ton of effort. And I think if it really fits in the character and it's something that you can do for low effort, then yeah, for sure. Like, and also as long as it's not super annoying, or if it is super annoying, it happens infrequently. You know how it is. Sometimes you have that super annoying character, and you're like, I kind of love that character, but can they please go away? And then they do, and you're like, okay, good. So yeah, I don't think you have to do these like super over the top animated videos. I think when I played this game, there was a part of me that was like, well, I'm never going to do those, but I love them so much. I'm like, okay, well, I can't do those at the moment, but I can take the underlying lesson of characterization and making these characters feel very like real and exciting. And I think that's another theme for me. I think this podcast is really helping me learn what I value in my own kind of game design, what I value in games. It's really helping me learn like, okay, things that I love characters that have strong personalities. I love a character driven plot. I love skill-based game mechanics, but like low-key skill-based game mechanics, like timing-based mechanics. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Let's keep going on these questions. My next question is it fine to have a grab bag of ideas in your game? Is it fine to have a whole bunch of different disparate ideas in your game? Because this game has all these different mini games, but it pulls it off. I think the trick is avoiding scope creep and making sure that you can execute on all of these. If you're somebody who really loves designing game mechanics, and likes having some variety and doesn't really like filling out like all of this one idea, right? If you really want to mix it up, if you want to go all over the place with it, I think there's a way to do that and have it still be a great game. There are so many games that have amazing mini games, and you could make a game of mini games. I think I've seen one on Steam. I don't remember specifically what it was. But you can make that sort of a game. It's completely fine to have a game just be pretty chaotic and have a ton of ideas. I mean, look at Nier Automata. That game is so many different games in one, right? That is not a single game. That is a lot of different play styles all in one game. There are games that do that. I mean, there are like games from my childhood that are literally mini game collections, like Fusion Frenzy. So yeah, I think it's totally fine, but you got to watch the scope. And that brings me to the next question. What sacrifices have to be made to avoid excessive scope creep? I think it's important, if you're making a ton of different mechanics, that you really make sure you know where they are and what they are and how interconnected they are. I think the less interconnected the mechanics are, the easier it is to avoid scope creep. I just came up with that theory right then and there. Let me think about whether or not that's very accurate. My thought process is, if it's interconnected, then every time you change one, it changes all the others and it has an impact on them, and then you have to modify them. And the worst thing is having to constantly modify everything, because you're not really, you're just polishing, but like you're not really adding a lot necessarily. So you gotta, my feeling is that you gotta kind of be careful about that dynamic. So my thought is, the more separated you can make these like mini games from the other parts of the games, the better. Yeah, because if it has a huge impact on everything else, it's kind of an issue. It can be really rough. So that's a big sacrifice to me. Like, you can't have all of them be so deeply interconnected without having your scope go crazy. And the other part is, like, sometimes you just got to lock in the content and say, this mini game is something they are going to play for 5 minutes, and that's it. That's all there is to this mini game. And if people I just hit the mic. I hope that wasn't too loud for you. If people absolutely love that minigame, maybe you can expand on it in a later thing, or maybe you can throw some really cheap DLC down, right? I'm not a big DLC guy, which is why I say really cheap. It's, it's got to be worthwhile. If you're going to make DLC, it's got to be something that like gives you value, gives the players fair value for what it costs. Okay, last question. And I think this is maybe the easiest question, but I wanted to throw it in here. Do games have to make sense? And my answer is no. I say that because Dave the Diver is absurd in a lot of ways. It's bizarre. It's goofy. It's got like that anime vibe where like nothing is really how it would be in the real world. Everything's over the top. Everything's a little bit ridiculous. I just think games don't have to make sense. And I think it's good to remind ourselves of that sometimes, because every once in a while I get into this thing where I'm like, well, that's not realistic. And I'm like, yeah, and who cares, right? We're making a game. It's cool. We don't have to be realistic here. Now, having said all of that, now that we're done talking about these concepts, let's talk about what I've done in my own game development this week. I'm still working on Soot. I have been wanting to add lighting to this game for a while. I've got these little flame enemies. I've been wanting to give them some lighting. And the first time I tried to do it, I could not get anything working. I was doing the Unity lighting system stuff. I didn't really look deep into it. I just started playing with it. That's kind of how I learned. And I went, okay, let's just throw some like point light on this or whatever. And it wasn't doing anything. I couldn't figure it out. Fine. Recently, I went, you know what? This is so excessive the way I thought about this. I was like, what if I create another tile map grid and make the tiles extremely small, and then make it so that like about the size of 1 pixel, not a screen pixel, but a pixel in my game, right? Because I'm using pixel art. What if I make it about that size, and then each tile they're all just black, and then with your character's proximity or any particular enemy's proximity, it will change the alpha, change the transparency of the tiles that are closest to it, and so on. And then I was like looking up how to do this, and I was like, wait, this is not how this should be done, I don't think. This seems like a really computationally expensive, absurd way to do this. But I was trying to brainstorm before I like Googled how to make Fog of War. So I looked into that, and then I was like, okay, let's just do the Google search and figure this out, because I'm coming up with these insane ideas that are like going to be a mess. And anyway, I ended up learning about sprite masks somehow. And then I realized that I can basically just make a giant like black sheet that covers the entire screen with very slight transparency, and then have a little spot around my character where you can see everything, where the black sheet is not there. And you know what? As soon as I put that in, I was like, oh, I have seen this in multiple games before. I have definitely seen this before. And I was like, and the resolution is a little wrong. This sprite mask is too crisp. So then I made a little custom sprite mask, with my own, with the correct scale for the pixels, so that it looks like it's still pixel art, even though it's like the vision around the character. I didn't want it to be too crisp. I didn't want it to be so like excessively, it had such a different resolution. It did not look right. So I changed it. I made that. And so now, anyway, my game essentially has lighting. It has like a little cool pseudo lighting. And then I had this idea, which was, oh, I need lights. I need torches. I need something that I can place, some kind of candle for visibility so that the whole level isn't just dark and you don't just have to jump into the abyss all the time to see stuff. And in trying to design this, I was like, the sense of scale is all wrong. I don't like the sense of scale. The candles are too big and there's no way to make them small enough because the character is so small. Like if I make a candle is so much bigger than this tiny speck of soot, right? And I was, this is me focusing on realism, I guess, but whatever. I didn't like how it ended up actually looking in the game, so I can't go with that. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to make a tiny little ember and give it a little face and have it be a little cute thing. But it looked too much like an enemy. And then finally, I go, wait a minute. What if these are corpses? What if whenever your character dies, he leaves a little soot guy, kind of like a little embery ghost guy, which provides light? And that was a moment for me where I was like, holy crap, that's perfect. That is exactly what I want. Because then you get, and this is very slight, but you get a little bit of modular like difficulty. You get a little bit of automatic difficulty adjustment. Every time your character dies, you get lighting wherever you died, and now you get like a warning to be more careful there, and you can see the area better, right? And then you get this feeling of like, oh man, I died, and there's lighting, and you see how many times you died, and it makes you want to play the level without dying at all and navigate it through the dark. But if you're not like that, if you want to see things, you can go die places intentionally to see better. And low-key makes the game feel bigger because you don't see everything. You've kind of got to explore a little bit. It adds a sense of mystery. It adds a sense of exploration. So happy about it. So I thought of this and I went, oh God, this is not within my scope. Am I going to do this or not? This seems like it could add a lot of problems. It seems like it could be difficult. And I sat with it for like 20 minutes, literally laid down and thought about it while like taking a half nap for 20 minutes. And then I was like, this is too cool. I like it too much. And it's not going to be that hard to implement. The only real problem would be if I had the corpses have some kind of a collision thing where they're sticking to the platforms. And I ended up not doing that. I ended up making it so that they stay exactly where you died. And I'm just designing it to be a little bit of like a floating thing. And that makes more sense anyway. So I don't have to figure out where to put the corpse or like where to lock it to or like make it fall or any of that stuff. I don't have to worry about collisions. And once I figured out that I could do it that way, I was like, okay, perfect. Let's go. I didn't even figure out that I could deal with the collisions that way. I just figured out the only real problem is going to be collisions. And then I went, I can figure out a way around that. And then that was it. I was like, okay, we're doing this. It's probably going to take a week at the most. So let's do this. Let's lock it in. And I started working on it. And as soon as I got it going, I was like, I love this. This is so a mechanic that I wanted. It adds so much to this. And I think the reason I was willing to break scope on this is because it was like a week of work for something that I felt would add so much value. I also looked at it and I went, if I have to add a month to my timeline for this one thing, it's worth it because it's going to add so much to the game. I was getting frustrated with like, I had zoomed out the camera and you could see too much of the levels and I didn't like it. There was all this stuff that I had to deal with and I was like, okay, we need to do this. And I'm very happy that I did. It's also helping me with the remaining level design because now I can design all the future levels with this lighting in mind. And I kind of think it opens up the options a little bit. I'm not 100% how much that's true, but I think it creates a little bit more mystery and gives me more options, right? I do have one more point to talk about with my own development. I'm going a little long on this week because I'm excited about it. The one more point that I have is there's this thing of like flow and sticking. I'm having this thing with my development where there are times when I'm working where it feels like it's flowing, it's going really smoothly, and then there are times when I feel like I'm getting stuck and I'm sticking to things and it's like being very like slow and difficult. I would say the flow happens when I am programming and creating game mechanics, and I guess kind of when I'm animating, not as much, but the biggest flow is programming, problem solving, all that stuff. And then the sticking point right now was the music stuff. So I got too stuck with music and I went, all right, we're going to pivot to the programming stuff. And I think it's going to be a mood thing. I think it's going to change, but it's just really interesting for me to observe the differences in my workflow for the different creative acts. Like the programming, something about solving a problem and like trying to logic my way through something really gets me into a state of flow and gets me pushing through things. Whereas creating something like music right now at the moment, when I don't have a really clear structure for exactly where the music is going into the game, much more difficult, much more tricky. And I think it's just interesting to observe our own sticking points when working on a project, like a major project, to see things where it's like, oh, this is, because then you can predict it. You can go, oh, this is going to be a hard day because I'm going to be working on the thing I usually get stuck with. How can I make it a little easier? One, I can just look at it and go, okay, if it's a little difficult, here's what I'm going to do. And it might not be difficult. That's the other thing, is going in with that expectation is a little bit of a trap too. So you can go in and you can go, okay, sometimes this is difficult. If it is, this is what I'm going to do. But if not, great. Because sometimes I get into the music and it flows like crazy. Like it is easy. It's the easiest thing in the world. It's so fun. It's so enjoyable. That's just not where I am right now. Right now, that's the programming. And that'll switch up. And hopefully I can line up what I'm working on with what is flowing well. That is the ideal. Let's move forward here. Let's wrap up this episode and talk about a repeatable behavior or something for sustainability, and talk about some questions that might help us refine our own projects. I have 4 questions for our projects this week. Question number 1. What parts of this game do I love? Next, what elements of the game would be better if I committed harder to them? Next is, am I pushing too hard on any elements in a way that makes the game design feel insecure? That's not as closely tied to what we've been talking about today, but it stuck out to me. It seemed like a good question. And then lastly, are there elements of my project that I love, which actually only exist in my head? How will other people know? And I think that's something that Dave the Diver executes really well. Is there are elements of this project where I think they loved these characters and they went, yeah, but everybody needs to love these characters. Like at some point in someone's brain, they knew exactly who that character was, and then they went, okay, how do I show this to everybody? And then the tip for this week, I really like this one. The tip for this week is to practice communication and listening to other perspectives. And this is including just like in your day-to-day life. And the reasoning behind this is it gives you a better chance of noticing your blind spots. We all have blind spots. And the more you're able to listen to other people's perspective, and the more you're able to communicate your own perspective too, the better your chances of finding out about your blind spots. Because if you're not able to communicate your own perspective effectively and at an appropriate time, other people can't give you valuable feedback on it. And if you're not able to listen to other people's perspectives, you can't understand where their feedback is coming from. If you can understand where their feedback is coming from, you can know when to ignore it and when to listen to it. And you can know who has really valuable feedback and who's just saying stuff because they want to feel important. It's hard to put it in such a negative light, but that is a thing that happens. Sometimes people who have never played a game in their life are like, oh, I know what you should do. And you're like, oh, do you? Okay, great. And there's a chance that they do know something valuable. That's the other part. That's why it's so important to like get out of your own perspective, because they might have some brilliant idea that you would never think of. It's that outsider perspective thing. But that's why you got to listen to them enough to know whether or not they're able to give you some valuable perspective like that. So anyway, that's my take. And then aside from all the game dev stuff, that's just such a valuable skill. It improves life. It improves your ability to communicate with other people and work with other people. It improves everything. Getting outside perspectives is so huge. I think it's one of the coolest things that we do. I think it's really exciting, and I think it just makes everything more fun. And ultimately, we're designing games here or playing games. And if you're deep into the whole gaming thing, you like things that are fun. So why not make everything a little bit more fun by seeing all of the different colors of human perspective, or as many as you can. I think there's just too many different angles and too many perspectives. Like, it's impossible to understand all of them. With that thought, that's everything that I have for you this week. Thank you so much for listening. It was really fun for me this week sharing everything that I'm working on with my game and talking about this game that I love. This was a particularly fun episode for me, so I hope you enjoyed it. I will talk to you all next week. Until then, have a good time, make some stuff, and have fun with it. I will see you next week.